The second semiotics lecture is going to build on your knowledge of icons, indexes, and symbols, the fundamental pieces of semiotics that we learned in the first lecture, and introduce a lot of new terms and cover new territory. Here you see a diagram that lays out in a broad way the main branches of semiotics, which is, as we learned previously, is the science of signs. And it covers these three primary territories of syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. In the first lecture, we talked primarily about semantics, in which are included the ideas of icon, index, and symbol, the three different modes of representation. Semantics talks about and addresses issues of the software of language, the way that we create meaning, the way that we create signs and signifiers. Also important to the study is the idea of syntax, which is the hardware aspect of language, where we introduce a sense of structure into how language should be formed and how culture sets up and eventually codifies things in a grammar or a rule set that determines proper ways of communication. And then the third area is that of pragmatics, which talks about the context in which language is used and the function of language, the everyday way that we use words and image to communicate. So how do they function, and in what settings do they function properly? And when we understand the contextual issues behind communication, we can then use that understanding of what's proper and what's useful to focus our communication more appropriately on what the audience needs are. So let's talk about pragmatics for a little bit. To go into a little more detail about that, it's the relation between signs and the effects they have on the people who use them. That's what Wikipedia says pragmatics is. So it's about the relationship between humans and this language. Catherine McCoy says that pragmatics is about the function and it's about the context for the use of signs. So very similar. And then our third source says that pragmatics is the study of the way in which signs are used and interpreted. So again, it's about that the daily use, the way that context affects our language. So if we're in a particular situation, we might communicate differently than if we're in situation B. Denotation. That is the primary meaning that we get when we see a word or we see an image. It's the kind of the dictionary definition. It's just the facts. What do you see? And that's the primary meaning. As opposed to that, we have the idea of connotation, which is the secondary meanings and associations that you have of the sign. And connotation gets pretty interesting because we bring to it our own past experiences as a viewer. We bring to it the social rules and conventions that we've learned over time. And so it's not just what is pictured, but it's how it's pictured. Or if we're talking about language, it's how that word is said. So you could say the word dog a whole bunch of different ways, and depending on the severity of your voice, the volume, the inflection, it could be interpreted as a warning. It could be interpreted as a question, dog. It could be taken as an insult. So it's about how you say it. It's about how you picture it. And that's what brings about the secondary meanings and associations for people. So when looking at this image, the denotation of the image is that it's a child soldier, that he's in the jungle, he's holding a machine gun. Now the connotations are the secondary things that we bring to it. They're the personal associations that we have. So we think of things like maybe he's forced into being a soldier. Maybe we think of him as a rebel, as rebel forces, because maybe the official army wouldn't have or wouldn't employ child soldiers. So maybe he's from an impoverished area that's fighting back in some way against larger authority. We might think of violence. We might think of, any number of things that we bring to the image that aren't literally pictured here. The denotation of this image is that it's an Apple, and more specifically that it's Apple Computer Corporation. The connotations that this particular Apple image brings are that it's sleek, that it's modern, contemporary, it's very stylish, that it's liquidy and gel-like and reflective, and all those kind of sophisticated sort of associations that we have, as well as our perception of the brand in general. We bring that to this simple silhouette of an apple with a bite out of it. So in all these images, we see pictured the same thing. What are the facts? What's the primary definition here? We're seeing an apple. But how it's pictured, as opposed to what it's pictured, brings about various connotations. So what are the different connotations that you see here? What are the things that you associate with each of these images? One might be more the idea of tartness. One might be the idea of sweetness or freshness because it has a leaf. The bottom right image might be of freshness, like maybe we think more of a farm fresh apple because you see the water droplets. Of course, on the lower left, you see it pictured with a book, so we think about the education and teachers and all those kind of cultural conventions that we have that we associate with that type of image. The next term, polysemy. It literally translates to many meanings. Poly, many, semi, meanings. So Roland Barthes is a noted theorist. He talks about media and image and culture a lot. If you ever go to grad school, you will learn a lot about Roland Barthes. He says that all images are polysemous. All images have multiple meanings. And so it is, what is pictured, but that thing that is pictured could go in a lot of different directions. So take this house. What all could it mean? It could mean affluence. It could mean home sweet home. It could mean, it could conjure connotations or memories of, of your childhood, my childhood. A lot of it depends on what you're using the image for. What's the context? So the pragmatics of the image might start to shift it into different territory. But according to Barth, every image is polysemous, so it could have multiple meanings associated with it. A syntagm is a collection of signs that's organized into a linear sequence. So syntagms occur at multiple levels, and it's important to keep this in mind because it can get more and more complex. It can occur at the level of the word, the level of sentence, the level of story formation. It could be even a sequence of stories if you're talking about a television show or a series of comic books or something like that. It's all about the linear sequence. What do you see first? What do you see next? So if you think about syntax, that's an easy way to associate with syntagm. Syntax is about the order, right? In this image-based example of syntagm, you can see that based on our American convention of reading left to right, that the syntax of this sequence of images makes no sense. It's been rearranged, things have been omitted, and so when we move left to right, we don't make much sense of the story. But when we fill in the blanks and when we rearrange things in the proper syntax, then the syntagmatic sequence starts to make sense to us. The story becomes discernible and understandable. And this can happen with typography, even within a single frame, by using hierarchy to guide the reader through a particular sequence of reading. You can move them left to right or top to bottom through headers and subheaders and body copy to create a particular type of syntax even within a single frame. If you think about syntax and creating a syntagm at these various levels, you can see again by these examples, letter forms, how order is crucial to meaning. So the idea of book being ordered different ways until it actually makes sense as B-O-O-K, reading left to right. Or even at the sentence level, boy bites dog versus dog bites boy. Of course, that changes the meaning considerably. Syntagmatic conventions form over time. And as language develops and language changes, that's how we get the rules that make our grammar. And so, if you study foreign languages, you understand that syntax is different in Spanish or in French than it is in English. So we'll tend to put objects before subjects or vice versa, depending on what language you're speaking. A good way to think about syntagms is relating them to writing and thinking of them as running horizontally. So you have word 1, word 2, word 3, word 4. Of course, you can stick images in there as well, but it's easy to think of them as running horizontally, much like a sentence would operate. So paradigm, in contrast to syntagm, is a set of items that form mutually exclusive choices. If you think about the idea of a coloring book, you have an apple outlined on a coloring book page. You could make all sort of choices on what color you want to color inside that apple shape. You could color it red, you could color it blue. Those are those mutually exclusive choices that you have. Another way to define paradigm is that it's the class of all items that can be substituted into that same position or that same slot in a sentence, or if we're talking about visual things, it could be any number of things that could be slotted into a particular position in a composition. If you think about, again, the alphabet and the formation of a word, the middle slot there between the D and the G, it could be filled with several choices. They are mutually exclusive. You can't fit multiple letters in there. You could, but if we're forming a 3-letter word, we can only put one letter in the middle there. So we could choose to put an O, we could choose to put an I to form dig, we could choose to put a U to form Doug. And so each of those slots make up those mutually exclusive choices. So this is an example below of color choices. So for each of those rings, we can choose to color them one color. And so here in this example, I'm making various paradigmatic choices and switching those colors out for each of the concentric circles. It's helpful to think of paradigms as running vertically as opposed to syntagms running horizontally. So you have a 4-word sentence, and the third word could be any number of words. We'll say that's an adjective. So if the fourth word is dog, the third word could be big dog, it could be hairy dog, it could be silly dog, it could be angry dog. So those are all the different choices we can make to describe that dog in the syntagm that we're creating. And the paradigm is all the various choices that you can make. Convention is a cultural agreement about what a sign means or how we should respond to it. So as a people, we start to form ideas and implicit agreements about a particular image, about a logo, some sort of graphic, a sign, like a street sign or billboard or whatever, and how we will respond to it. So here's a few examples of conventions. The idea of the ransom note. We all kind of agree that fits a particular type of situation where someone is choosing to remain anonymous and communicating in this sort of menacing way using this cut and paste method. And then in the middle we have the conventional sort of ideas and associations with film noir and the idea of the glamorous but dangerous female and the manly detective smoking a cigarette. the idea of mood lighting and mystery and the drama associated with that. So we tend to bring, as a culture, these collective responses and associations with these types of signs. And then the idea of the old school yearbook image. So we also, again, we tend to have this agreement as a society about what this type of image means. We know where it comes from almost immediately because it has a conventional type of look. There's a certain type of pose. There's a certain range of looks. There's a certain type of background. Now those conventions are changing as technology allows us to put artificial backgrounds back there, and the art of school photography is getting much more complex. But historically, this is the convention that has been set up for high school or school yearbook images in general. So motivation is, in terms of semiotics, motivation is how much the signifier describes the concept or describes the signified. So it's about that relationship and the closeness of the relationship between the signifier and the signified. Here's a kind of a scale or a range of motivation. So highly motivated signs tend to look very much like the concept that they're signifying. And unmotivated signs, as they're called, tend to look less and less like the signified, the thing that we're referring to. So, of course, there's a range there from more abstract and harder to discern to very clear and very easy to discern. So going back to Barth for a little bit, he offers 3 pieces of a system for decoding and unpacking a message. So he has the system for reading text and image combinations, and he says that they're generally comprised of 3 pieces: the linguistic message, the coded iconic message, and then the non-coded iconic message. So the first part, the linguistic message, that's just the text. It's what you read, the denotations, the dictionary definition of the text, and then also the connotations that you bring to the text. The next part in this active decoding is that coded iconic message. So that's the symbolic message, the imagery, the symbolism that it brings, and the connotations. So what gets interesting here is that the reader starts to participate in making the meaning by applying their knowledge of cultural codes and signs. So you're bringing all that cultural baggage with you, and you're saying, okay, I've learned this, I had that particular experience, and you're bringing those connotations into your reading of the message. And typically, that's going to be a little bit different than other people that are interpreting this same message. And then the third part is the non-coded iconic message. And so this is, again, the dictionary definition of what you're seeing. It's the denotative reading of the image, such as a photograph or an illustration. It is what it is. So the coded and the non-coded iconic messages, they can't be separated in terms of signification. When you look at an image, you simultaneously see the denotation and start making associations. So you read those things at the same time, just like the Apple logo. It's not just what is pictured, but it's how it's pictured. And it's important to remember that all this stuff is happening in a split second. A couple more terms to go over that expand on our knowledge of text and image relationships. So the first way that text and image can interact is through anchorage. And anchorage is a process of applying text in sort of a label type of way to an image. And so the text fixes the meaning of an image. So Barth says that the reader is remote controlled to a predetermined meaning. So it actually narrows the possibilities for interpretation of the image. So examples of this are captions for images like in a magazine or book, when you title an image, when you add some sort of a label, and it typically will answer the question, what is it that I'm looking at? And it clarifies that information. So here in the example, you see an image of a canoe, and you know that we're talking about canoes, and also that we're talking about vacations, and we're not necessarily talking about extreme sports, or we're not talking about water quality or fishing. We're talking about vacations in Breckenridge by canoe. The other way that text and image can interact is through a process called relay, and that's when text advances the image by supplying meanings that are not found in the image itself. So you look at the image and the denotation here. It's it's van, it's man, it's woman, it's darkness, and the connotations that come with that. It's a little bit ominous. The man's in shadow, so he's maybe a little bit scary or whatever. But then the text is telling you things that you cannot get by looking at the image. So this caption, I thought life was going to be hard, but I never expected it to be impossible. That's not a message that we can get, that we can discern just by looking at the image. And so that's how relay works. Those two things are fairly separate, and each brings their own new bit of information to the overall message.